If you're like me, you're probably feeling that you've had a bombardment to the senses in the last 48 hours. I know that I have spoken to a robot who's spoken back to me. I have used my hands to build blocks in virtual reality. I have moved balls with the power of my brain. And I have seen stunning NASA images of just how quickly we humans are changing the globe. We've heard a lot of talk here about the fourth revolution, the fourth industrial revolution, otherwise known as the technological revolution. It's happening so quickly, and we can witness that just being here. Given this change, the question that we really want to focus on this morning during this debate is, will more information to healthcare and more digital access to healthcare information make us healthier? So we're going to have a debate, and I want all of you to be thinking about this question. In just a moment, I'm going to take a show of hands to see what side of the debate you'd want to weigh in on. Do you think more information can make you healthier? Do you think there's a flip side to that, that more information just might make you more neurotic and more worried, but won't extend your life or make you healthier? Think about that as I introduce our guests. So we're joined today by Steve Davis, right over here. Steve is the CEO of PATH, which is a global nonprofit. He's also the former director of social innovation at McKinsey. Daljit Singh, here to my left, is president of Fortis Healthcare, which is a system of hospitals in India. And Bobby Robbins is the CEO of Texas Medical Center, which includes the renowned cancer center, MD Anderson. So now I want to take this show of hands. How many of you think that, yes, indeed, more access to health information can make us healthier? Let's see that. All right, it's a fair number. How many, playing devil's advocate, would go the other way? Oh, all right. All right, so we're going to start with you, Steve. Let's have it. Let's have the thinking that perhaps more information about health might not help us out.
Well, thanks, and it's great to be here. And I am happy to play the devil's advocate. I've
Excellent.
Been trained in the Socratic process,
Perfect.
so I
That's
know
what we
how
want
to do
here.
this as a trained lawyer. But I do want to do first off a qualification that I was an evangelist early on in the digital transfer revolution. I actually helped Bill Gates write his first book back in the 90s, where we were writing about the information superhighway. So I was involved in the internet before we knew it was the internet, and continue to believe that information and data is transformative. So I do want to qualify that I spend a lot of my time thinking about how we transform global health around the world, particularly to address the inequities in health that we see around the globe, and using digital data tools. So qualifications aside. But I do think there are three kind of areas of concern that I think the basics that we all need to be thinking about. And maybe there are areas in which either you take a hardcore view on it, that this is a bad thing, although more likely what we do is say, look, how do we address these issues? How do we mitigate these problems and as we move forward? And those three areas are, one is just there's too much. There's too much coming at too many people that's completely uncurated, it's uninformed, it's unedited, it's unscribed, and it's coming at you in volumes. And so, we certainly see that the amount of data people are trying to decipher around not only their personal health, but understanding sort of these numbers that are thrown at you, whether it's data around climate, data around health, data around other kinds of aspects. And so I do think there's a data overflow, and it's happening more and more at the personal level. And we do know that, even the Fitbit phenomena, which is a very modest effort, but important, because I think wearables will be important, but that already they're kind of a nag. People are starting to stop using them. I have enough things people nag at me. I don't need another thing, So I think that's a phenomena of we've got too much coming at you. And we certainly have evidence of times where people have made stupid decisions based on what they read over the internet around health practices than they could have made more informed decisions. So my first complaint would be too much, too little curation, too much attribute. The second one is a little higher level concern, which is that we're all just too wired. And I have a 20-year-old son who's an internet addict, probably. So, I mean, maybe I'm just coming out as a parent. But we have all sorts of evidence of children in a lot of countries in the world where the 8 to 10 hours a day is being spent in front of a computer, not getting enough exercise, not getting enough exposure to social engagement and a real social engagement, and what the long-term impact. So, I do think the internet of unhealthy might be that we're just spending too much time, and I think we don't know yet the level of which anxiety and depression and other symptoms may be accumulated. But I think the final sort of even bigger meta issue is this is really a first world problem. I'm sorry. We work in a lot of, I spend my time mostly working in the most poor places in the world where we are trying to get access, trying to develop models that people can have better health. And honestly, very few people are suffering from too much data there. That this is a luxury problem to be concerned about. So I do want to make sure we're framing this as a kind of a nice problem to have, rather than at the end of the day, empowering people around the world with health data will ultimately lead to transformation.
And we'll get to this, but I know that you have some examples in your own work where digital-enabled devices can help places in the developing world to give communication to people who are otherwise hard to be in communications with. So we'll get to that. And to your point about the Fitbits, I overheard a conversation in the bathroom here at the conference of a woman saying, I finally just put my Fitbit on my son's wrist because I knew he was going to go out to soccer practice. And my data was being streamed with my colleagues' data, and so I needed to keep up. So it was a form of using the Fitbit as a form of cheating, I guess. But to your point,
some
that it
people
can be
put it on their pets.
Right.
Yes.
I don't know if that would go as far as the son's soccer practice, but.
So I even have a more pathetic one. So I was with my partner in France. We were in Paris. It was a lovely April meeting day, and we were I had been in a board meeting all day, and came out, and we said, let's take a nice walk. We're taking this kind of a romantic getaway. And it was like, yeah, we still have 5,000 more steps to take today. And I'm like, really? We're having a romantic walk in Paris and you're counting the steps?
Always metrics, always metrics. Okay, Bobby Robbins, what make this case that greater access can help us perhaps become healthier?
Well, I would say, the old axiom that knowledge is power should mean that it's a good thing, right? But I agree with Steve that information is not knowledge. Right? So I think that I agree with him. We're in this so-called situation where all having continuous partial attention, right? We were talking about doing heart surgery earlier, and you need to be in the zone.
Bobby is a heart surgeon by training, so you all know.
So you had to get in your zone to be able to move that ball, and I look forward to trying that after this session. But I do think that, and I'll focus more on the acute problem, because our medical center is really focused on sort of tertiary and quaternary care. But having said that, we're doing many projects, one of which with Apple right now that I'll describe in a little more detail later. But Houston is a city that now is the third largest city in the United States, and the most diverse city in America, but we have 30% of our population that has no health coverage. So getting to the underserved is really important, and I struggle with how is this data going to get to them when they can't, many of them don't have smartphones, so I agree this is a first world problem. Having said that, the issue that I think, and it goes to Steve's point, that there's so much data and it's so unstructured. One of the things that we're doing with our Apple project is if someone comes to me and says, here's all my Fitbit data, I only have a certain amount of time that I can spend with them. So we're focusing on how do we get all of the Internet of Things data and get it directed into a more structured way into the electronic health record, so that when you see a physician or an extender, that person can make good decisions about guiding you. Having said that, though, I do believe there is this massive push toward consumerism. And many people are obviously trying to get their care through the internet. You were talking about you feel a lump in your neck, and now you're, at least
Became neurotic, and
stage
I Google,
2B,
yeah, exactly,
Hodgkin's
5-year
disease.
lifespan for, exactly, for some kind of skin cancer. We become the worried well sometimes when we have information and don't know what to do with it.
I agree,
Incomplete information.
and I agree also that I've been overwhelmed by all of the things that I wanted to see at this forum. One of which that I have to admit that I was blind on was the whole discussion that people are going to buy 3D printers and print their own drugs at home. So that one, and it's already happening, and I can see how the illicit drug providers will flourish in that environment.
I'm
but
imagining as a physician you'd think this is not a good idea.
Yeah, but that you bypass physicians and pharmacists altogether. So I'm a little concerned about that. But going back to the point that I do think that this will benefit health, not only individual or personalized health, but population health. Just the CDC talking about they can predict where there are going to be outbreaks of influenza just by the number of hits that people going to the internet and Googling, what to do when you have the flu. So I think that it's something that will ultimately prove beneficial to health in general and also for the individual. But we're in the early days, and I think trying to get that, the word curation is a good one, but get the unstructured data and the volumes of it, and having, where's the balance between being aware of what's going on, but not overburdened by it. We're going to move to an area, I think, eventually where there'll be implantables, but I think it'll be more customizable. So for people with heart disease, they would have a certain implant and they would get data. And so one of the things we're focusing on is really the management of chronic disease, whether it be diabetes or heart failure or even mental health issues. So you can tell a lot about, especially adolescents. If you're connected to their device, you can tell, well, I see you were up last night at 3 a.m. What was that about? You were surfing. Why weren't you sleeping? Or is something wrong? And one of the startups in our accelerator actually had a nurse avatar. Instead of just data being transferred back and forth through texting or whatever, you actually saw an avatar who interacted with you personally. So I think that there is going to be great potential, but I think we're in early days and too early to say how it's going to improve health, but I do believe it will ultimately.
And Daljit, greater access leads to better health?
Well, let me start with a bit of philosophy around this. I think I've heard some very interesting comments from Bobby and Steve. And the reference that I like to draw is the film Matrix, where Neo has a choice. He has to take either the blue pill or the red pill. And if he takes the blue pill, he's going to remain in the matrix and live in a world of illusion, okay? And the second choice is to take the red pill and move into a world where truth is reality. It's a harsher world, but he needs to deal with it. And I think that if you look at that as a construct of what development actually does to us, we always have a choice, and the world that we live in is mired in duality. So if you look at the yogic system in India, we call it Dvaita, or the Chinese Tao way of thinking, which talks about the yin and yang, which says that for every positive, there is a negative. For every crest, there is a trough. For everything good, there is a negative impact. Now, all these are actually intrinsic parts of life, and we need to deal with it in the real world. If we are always bothered about what is the negative of whatever development takes place, development will probably get stifled. So I'm on the platform that that a person needs to have discretion, needs to have discrimination, needs to have to be able to consult in order to draw meaning from life and whatever development needs to present, brings forward to all of us. So atomic energy, great uses, but it can also be used for a huge negative. We are looking at robots now outside there. They're going to have great uses, but equally, what's going to happen to human relationships? Industrialization was important for jobs, but it also led to a huge problem around climate. And the point is, there's always a flip side to every situation.
So my interpretation of your answer is that it depends.
It depends. I won't say it depends. I think we need to make a conscious choice. We need to be aware of that. So internet or technology to me is a platform. It's how do we use this platform for larger good? How do we prevent ourselves from moving into a domain that makes us unhealthy? The points that Steve and Bobby have made are absolutely relevant. So if I spend all my time looking at WhatsApp throughout the day, my son does that pretty much most of the day, he needs to figure out how to self-regulate himself. Technology by itself is neutral.
I think we all have this in common. We all have sons who are obsessed with this.
I have two, yeah.
And if you really look at it from a healthcare point of view, I see the internet as a great empowering tool. But the fact that it also has a lot of junk on it, it misleads you and takes you along paths, and you don't know how to navigate those paths.
That's right.
Is a challenge that we will need to figure out a way of overcoming.
And that cues us to something, a visual I want you guys to check out.
Yeah.
This is something that is a common experience. Many of us have had this in different iterations. So, you're thinking, oh, I've got this pain here, and you Google, I have a pain in the back of my head. So, the local hospital system will have a pop-up that says you need an MRI. Maybe not. I didn't mean to bash the hospital system. Or hey, just take an aspirin. Or you see an ad of some sort because you see trademark and you think, oh, this is not information from a neutral source. This is information from some sort of company. So, I think this is an interesting conundrum. I look at that and I think, well, I'm a reasonably educated person and my life experience tells me that when someone's trying to sell you something, I'm not so sure I want to take their advice. If I were to tap on the take an aspirin option, I might look at, is that coming from the Mayo Clinic or is it coming from some quack doctor I've never heard of? So it goes to this idea that what we do with information depends a lot on our life experience and our education. Is that right, Steve?
Yeah, well, two things. One is, at least this one has real pharma TM, so you think, wow. I mean, I think the worst is you go to these places that look like they're coming right out of a published, peer-reviewed medical journal, and then you realize there's no peer review or no medical, facts underneath it. So, and I think that's the scariest part. But yeah, this is part of the problem. Is that, and now you could argue that over time the market will sort of clean this up. That the better sites come to the top of the search. There gets a lot of ways that crowds will source it down. But I think that's another problem. The other problem that if I'm supposed to be more provocative and we're all agreeing with each other, so I'm not following the rules and that bothers me. So
Get back with
here's
the program,
the provocative
Steve.
one that I would put out to these guys is it drives me crazy in this fourth digital transfer, the fourth revolution, and at the World Economic Forum, that people can talk about health the entire 3 days, and biology or chemistry hardly ever come up anymore.
It's all tech.
It's all about, bits and bytes. And, at some point, blood still matters. At some point, viruses still count. At some point, and I think one of the things that worries me, honestly, is and I come from the West Coast, I'm a internet guy, but that we've actually started moving so far to the world of bits and bytes that we have forgotten some of the fundamental biological issues that we still have to confront in the world. Like, we don't have a vaccine for HIV yet. There are lots of things we don't know how to deal with, and just being able to have an app isn't going to cure that.
Bobby, as you look at this slide, what comes to mind?
Well, I would say that Steve hits on some very good points, but if I had to choose which one I would pick, I would probably pick the one at the bottom, and then because you have some source of information. But I agree, going back to, and not just because I'm a physician, but the physicians and the healthcare providers are out of the equation, right? It's sort of a safety net in the background now, only to be used when absolutely needed. So I think that, Steve's right about this. The other issue is there was a discussion on this platform yesterday about data, and certainly there's become a big shift in the millennials thinking, well, I don't care if my data is used, whereas maybe people my age are really protective about privacy. The other issue is that I think that eventually we'll all have our genetic code on our smartphone, and we go to our doctor and say, I just got my, my whole genome sequenced. What does it mean, doctor? And of course, we have no idea because we're not there. So I think technology is out in front of the science and the biology of what's really going on, and that's another big issue.
And this brings up another point, Daljit. Increasingly, with personalized medicine, people might learn something about, their risk. For instance, you might have genes that make you more predisposed to lung cancer. We all know that smoking is a risk, but perhaps you have some sort of genetic risk. Does knowing that risk transfer into any other way to protect yourself other than the advice that is good for everyone, which is not to smoke? This is another issue that comes up in the era of too much information.
Well, I think there is a certain body of information that can be put to great use. So for example, if I was 20 years younger and it came up that I have a propensity for cancer, what would I do with this data? I've got two things. I'd go to the expert and figure out, can you manipulate my genes? Can you do something there which can sort it out at the genetic level? Or number two, now that I have this propensity, how do I manage myself in a manner that I have the least probability, I reduce the probability of getting cancer? And I think that's a great level of empowerment. It also, in many ways, forces me to think about my health. Today, what we are actually witnessing is that we are moving from an age where there was a blind trust in the doctor, and we all went to the doctor, we never questioned. That's the age that I come from, really. And whatever the doctor said was gospel truth, and that's why doc was God. Today, I think we are at a stage, because of the democratization of information, people are now beginning to move into this, what I call as the last frontier. We take care of everything. We take calls on the sort of cars we want to buy, the sort of lifestyle we want to lead, et cetera, et cetera. When it comes to health, we have no damn idea, actually. And today, there is a mechanism out there which allows us to make those choices in an informed manner. And I know it's an imperfect system, it's still broken, with a lot of misinformation there. But I need to fix that in order to get to the right sources. So if I saw that information, I would go to the right person and figure out what is true. Because at the end of the day, I must take ownership for my health and not let it be in somebody else's domain.
So I'm interested in your response, Steve. When we were chatting about yesterday, you were telling me that digitally enabled devices actually work sort of a different way in the developing world. So there's not the era, I'll pull up this slide, this is not the reality for many people in the developing world here, and many places where people are wearing Fitbits and tracking everything they're eating and tracking their exercise and their steps. There is this movement to sort of owning your health, a personal ownership of health. In the developing world, you were mentioning, Steve, that sometimes very simple digitally enabled devices just help give basic health information to women. For instance, women who are pregnant, who need neonatal care. If they're not physically in a place to get it, they might be able to get it digitally. Talk a little bit about that.
Sure. Yeah. No, I think the digital revolution and digital tools are profound in the way the next decade or 15 years of global development and health will work. And I actually think the SDGs will really need to be turbocharged because of digital tools. But there are some fundamental issues. First of all, just the basic ones that, a lot of places we spend a lot of our time are pretty much off the grid half the time, or that you just the fundamentals of how do you people are not, while they might have mobile devices, smart devices are not as accessible, et cetera. So you've got the general, but that will change. I do think there are some other barriers, and then I'll talk about a couple examples. The barriers being data culture. So there's a lot of issues about being a lot of tools, data and apps being thrown into these environments where, well-intended, interesting, social entrepreneurial, but they're, first of all, the ministers of health are going, oh my gosh, another entrepreneur coming at me with another tool. And I've literally been in places in Ethiopia where a health worker showed up with 5 different mobile devices that she's been asked to carry, each with a different requirement. So this pilotitis around all these tools and then having them not integrated, et cetera, is really creating more burden than utility at this point. And so, there are some serious challenges. Then the data culture challenges, we are doing a large work in several countries, Tanzania, Senegal, Zambia, supporting the ministries on really restructuring their data immunization tools. So how do you actually control getting kids vaccinated and understand that? But it's really fascinating, the power, it's so little to do with the technology. And it's so much more to do with, can a person at a health post feel empowered to actually change what they're doing with data, as opposed to primarily thinking of data as only something they're supposed to report up.
Yeah.
And so having sort of a virtuous cycle where you can change the behavior and make decisions using data is actually a completely unfamiliar concept. So it doesn't matter what the tool is. But there are some really amazing tools going on. I mean, we see in the work we're doing in Zambia to help support their elimination agenda around malaria, it's all been enabled because we can actually go into places where there's deep reservoirs of the parasite and actually track and figure out who's had a case of malaria, but then what that will tell us is there's some reservoir around where the mosquitoes will transfer it, and we can actually go do treatment around that whole reservoir, basically using new tools. Or a South Africa tool where Mom Connect, where actually simple tools telling moms that they need, they need to go to the doctor now, or have they arranged their transportation to get to the clinic to have the baby. I mean, just basic tools are actually empirically demonstrating a lot of impact. And then the final one I'll mention is in Ghana, where you've got Impedigree, which is a really interesting tool that you can actually start managing counterfeit. Understand, so we know the numbers are from 30 to 50% of all drugs used on the continent are actually counterfeit. And how do you actually start getting at that with using, being able to scan and record and understand whether this is actually a registered drug or not. So those things are going to be pretty cool when they get to scale.
Got it. Bobby, interesting point here that we're pivoting back to this idea of, on the personal side, an instinct to want to own more of your own personal health information, and with all the gadgets we have, how much easier that is to do today. I've heard, my brother-in-law is a general internist, and I often hear him say, after a few glasses of wine at the end of the day, that every patient that came in today was Dr. Google. They know more than I do. And every sort of interaction between the patient and the doctor becomes a little tense and maybe undermines a bit of that relationship of trust. Given that dynamic, is this a dynamic you're familiar with? Do you think that physicians need more training about how to turn that around in an era when clearly people are going to have more information? Do you think it works for the benefit of the patient's health, or sometimes does it work against?
Well, I think both. Being in Silicon Valley, I would get people who came in with a step-by-step from their internet research of exactly how they wanted their mitral valve repaired. I want you to go through a really small incision, and I want you to put neocords in, and this is exactly how I want you to do the operation.
So did you take notes and comply?
Well, I said, well, here are your options, and you can have a full sternotomy, and in your case, I'd recommend that. But if you want a really small incision, we'll do that. The chance of success may not be as good as if you had a full sternotomy. And so you try to turn it around, as you say, and educate people about, again, going back to information is not knowledge, and knowledge is power, right? So to have some way to interact with an expert I don't think that you would go on the internet and look to see how to repair your car and then you go do it, right? You find someone who's expert who can help you through that. And so getting back to this idea of how do you get all that data in a structured way into so that physicians and healthcare providers can give you good knowledge about your particular situation and how to deal with it. I just went to my physician, and it's amazing. I think that the most important gene yet to be discovered is the compliance gene, right? We all know exactly what to do, so why don't we do it? It's because we're humans. So the next frontier is probably going to be around how do we change behavior. And in order to do that, I agree that you need some personal interaction. You can't just, unless you're going to talk to an avatar, or talk to your computer and have a relationship like that movie where there was a relationship with your computer. You need the human interaction. It's the high-tech, high-touch thing. But I pulled, my physician said, how are you doing on your exercise? I go, well, I'm not really doing very much. He said, give me your smartphone. He pulled my smartphone out and went, and he said, you really suck. You're only doing like 1,800 steps a day. What are you doing? Don't you know that sitting is the new smoking? You need to get up and do stuff. So I do think that there's a way to get all this data. And you could, for instance, instead of managing a panel of 1,000 patients, in the future you may manage a panel of 10,000 patients, but you have all this data coming in, and you have people who are in the green area, and you know you don't need to contact them. The yellow, you need to contact them. If they're in the red, they need to come and see you. I think that's applicable to underdeveloped countries too, but you need to customize it to the local environment and environmental factors.
I want to talk about something that I call the Gwyneth Paltrow effect, and that is that celebrity culture has a very sort of strong grip on today's society throughout the world. And as a health reporter, I'm trained in evidence-based health reporting, and so if I do a story about do cleanses really help, I'm going to be looking, I'm going to do a PubMed search to start, and I'm going to look for published studies, and I'm going to try to get to any mechanistic understanding or explanation as to why it might help, and then I'm going to end up saying, hey, it probably won't, I don't know if it'll help, but it probably won't hurt. My voice is not as dominant as Gwyneth Paltrow's voice, unfortunately. And when she tells people to do a cleanse, many of them do it. I'm wondering if how this influences medicine when Gwyneth Paltrow is competing with PubMed. What do you think, Daljit?
I think that Bobby mentioned the point that we've got to figure out a way of improving compliance or influencing behavior. I think there are two ways to do it. One is we do it at the level of the self, and we've got some brilliant neuroscientists sitting at the back there who are doing a lot of research in this domain as to how can we, when we change our fundamental operating system to become more compliant, to begin to do the things that we already know. We know what good habits are, we know what good eating is, et cetera, et cetera. I think the second part is that, and just taking the excuse that we are all humans and therefore are subject to deviations from the norm, there are techniques that are used to bring people back on track. And often it is to use celebrities to talk about stuff that you want, either inculcate good habits as well as bad ones. So you can drink more Coke because there's a beautiful actress who drinks Coke, or
because Beyonce was paid $50 million to promote Coke.
That's exactly it. Or it could be a celebrity who's actually talking about, like Angela Jolie. She came out, she talked about breast cancer, and it created huge impact world over because she was a world-renowned celebrity, and it created positive impact and created consciousness. So I think we need to recognize that these are choices in front of us. These are tools that we can use towards a better end, and we need to be judicious about it.
Actually, it was Pepsi. Beyonce was paid by Pepsi. Sorry. Steve, let's go to you. I was thinking about your comment that we can be too wired. And I had a pretty dramatic experience here this morning. I went to experiment with that idea that you could use your mind to move the balls. And as I sat in the chair, there was a film crew there. And they said to me, "Oh, you don't mind if we film this, do you?" And I said, "Oh, no, no worries." And I'm thinking, oh my goodness, I really have to perform here. I'm on camera. So I sat there and nothing happened, nothing happened, and nothing happened. I started to get nervous, and I'm thinking everybody in the room is looking at me. And so I thought of something a yoga teacher taught me 10 years ago, this mantra that goes something like, everything I need, I have right now. So I said to myself, everything I need, I have right now, which was just a way of clearing my mind. That's all it was. And the minute that I cleared everything away and let it all ride away, the ball zoomed down to the end. It was shocking. And it was kind of goes to this idea of like when you unplug and you unclutter, you can focus on one thing. I'm just gonna get your reaction to this, Steve.
Yeah, well, a couple thoughts. One is, I think we need to study that a lot because there's another interesting entrepreneur here who's working on an app that, again, this is I've been put in the camp of I'm a great information-driven idea, but working on mental health, sort of spotting, identifying, and a lot of their work is suggesting that actually just knowing how much time you're checking your email, you're playing with apps, you're going to I'm one of these people that every time I have 2 minutes of downtime, I'm playing solitaire, and it's like, what's wrong with that? But that
actually, might be your mechanism for clearing your mind. It is actually
my Zen moment. That's my but it's on the, and I'm really bad at it. I lose all the time. But I do think we're going to have to understand just how much is too much in terms of anxiety and health issues that are created by that kind of mechanism. One thing I want to go back to, though, is on the celebrity, because I do think celebrity and political figures can be phenomenally helpful for good health, and they are until they're not, right? It's until they get then, and we've certainly seen it in things like when the Minister of Health of South Africa was saying HIV was not a virus, and just things like that when it really put us back decades, right? But one of the more interesting data that's come out, some projects we're working on is, so in a lot of times when you're trying to mobilize communities, and I believe there's a huge opportunity to use social media to mobilize communities for behavior change. But in the traditional model of global health and even public health in all countries is there's the medical authority prints a poster, they put the poster up on the wall, and you go into health posts around the world and they're literally wallpapered with posters that no one can read, and they're tattered, but then they figured, okay, well, that doesn't work so well, and there's evidence. So then they actually got, the football star in Ghana or the Bollywood star in India, and the evidence shows that behavior response after looking at longitudinally actually goes up considerably. I don't have the exact data, but considerably. But then the interesting thing is we actually then did this project now that you have projecting tools, is to say, but actually, if you actually asked a woman in the community who for instance, about safe birthing practices, which is a big issue with high maternal mortality in India, is to actually her telling that story and then projecting it to her friends at some, when they're getting together on the wall of her house, the numbers triple from what the Bollywood star told her to do. So, this is an example of who gives you the information, and can we sort of tie technology together with that personal touch in order to get reach, and so we're actually modifying that program and actually expanding it around the world.
Yeah, information spreads from person to person, and health behavior spread from person to person.
And particularly if they're trusted people in your community, not necessarily health officials, but trusted, friends or aunties.
Well, can I amplify on that?
Please.
So your social network is who you spend your time with outside of work, and who you go to when you need to make important decisions in your life, right? So I do agree that there is this phenomena of being in a peer group, and the Framingham, if you go back and look at the Framingham study, and you break it down on your social networks, the people who hung out in bars and drank a lot and smoked and didn't exercise, they clustered together because they were with people who liked to do the same things they did. So, for instance, one of my colleagues is here with me and ran a diabetes company in London. And it gets back to the slide that's up there about data. So you could have an insulin pump that's driven off of a smartphone, and you get the data back. And then, particularly in adolescence, they would want to know, well, how am I doing with my peer group in terms of my blood pressure control, my A1C level? So I do think that there is an intersection between social media and all of this data, but again, not excluding the experts to be able to be your muse or your advisor on how to maneuver through all this.
There's two different relationships there. Sort of, you want to be in step with your peers, but you also need to have this different relationship with the doctor or advisor. I'm curious, you mentioned that one of your accelerator projects was to use avatars to help people manage health. Did you find outcomes that made a difference? I'm imagining that if you get an email, and I've had this happen myself, the dental office sends an email or a text saying your children are due for their checkup, and it's one of 12 other things I get that day. But if there was more direct communication, and I'm imagining that if it were a personality, an avatar, that might develop a little relationship there, and it might be stickier. Is that what you're finding?
Oh, absolutely. Because you can ignore a text or an email, but if you knew you were going to log on and talk to Gwyneth or Angeline, then maybe you have that conversation. But again, it's going back to the personal relationship with someone who's going to be your trusted advisor, your muse, your coach, to be able to get you through whatever the issue is that you're dealing with.
Yeah. You mentioned the Framingham study. There was a stunning study published several years back where they took that data about the social network and smoking, and they plotted over time how smokers used to be surrounded by lots of people. So smokers were the center of a social network, and that by the year 2002, smokers were the outliers. They'd be the person at the outside smoking the cigarette as everybody else was inside, and it was an interesting graphic demonstration of just how society has moved. And of course, all of that data, when they were gathering it, nobody knew that it would produce all of these amazing observations. When you think
But that's only one part of the world,
Yes, yeah.
That hasn't moved in a lot of part of the world. Yeah.
Right.
And still, I'm shocked at how many young people in the U.S. still continue to smoke.
Yeah, we see
And
that.
smoking continues to grow in India and China.
Right, and within the U.S., I believe just growing within that 18 to 24, and the 18 to 24-year-olds will tell you they're not addicted, they're just social smokers, right? Yeah. I want to open it up to some questions here. Anybody have anything they want to weigh in with? As you look at these slides, do you see yourself in these slides? Are you yourselves, over here?
So, first of all, I think this is an absolutely excellent forum. I just wanted to make an observation. I think when it comes down to it, it's caveat emptor. So I did my fellowship at the Mayo Clinic. I might have a slight bias. I think Mayo's website is exceedingly good. I think WebMD's tagline should be, or it could be cancer, because it's basically what goes through. So to sum what we had on there. The other thing I think we need to be careful of is, I'm in the diagnostic field, so I actually think that more is better, but I also think you can have too much if it's not guided by a physician. And one of the things that worries me is that the ITing of that sort of thing. I'll give you an example, one word, Theranos, which is a prime example of an IT company who masqueraded as a diagnostic company and really didn't have the background or the board of advisors or so on, and yet managed to get on the front cover of Fortune magazine, Inc., New Yorker, you name it. So the concern I have there is that if something seems to be too good to be true, it often is, but if it gets into mainstream media and it's on the internet, it becomes truth and justice in the American way. So I just wanted to make a comment there on that.
But I think it raises a central point that's relevant to the debate we're supposed to be having, which is to what degree does regulation come in? And so and I teach at Stanford, so I see this a lot. But to what degree does the view that digital tools shouldn't be regulated? In fact, it's the enemy of the fourth revolution. And yet part of what we're seeing is, the WebMD model, is because it's a completely unregulated space. And so, what's the balance going forward? And that's actually the throwness story,
Yes.
is it's the regulated, when and where should regulation have intervened, or should have there been a regulatory pathway that was put in front of them? And we've got to figure out that balance going forward, because just because it's digital doesn't mean that some of the regulatory issues aren't still apparent.
And I think that's an important point, and it will be regulated. I do agree with you. Mayo Clinic website is outstanding. But there was a discussion yesterday about peer-to-peer money transfer, and the beauty of it is that it was, quote, unregulated. Well, in fact, when we heard the gentleman talking about, well, they are regulated in the U.S. and Canada and Australia, most places. So I agree that regulation eventually will have to get in. We saw it in stem cell therapies, especially for heart disease. You could put any cell in the body in the heart, and it would miraculously turn into new heart muscle and cure you. Well, it was all, just like IT is we're discussing, is way ahead of the science and the biology and the chemistry of health. The FDA had to step in and regulate and say, wait, you have to go through trials. It's the first time that a biologic was considered a device, and it was regulated by the FDA. So I think it's a very good point.
We have a question over here. If you can identify yourself first.
Hi, my name is Ihan, and I'm the co-founder of JJK Health. This forum is extremely relevant to me because we're a digital precision health company. When I say that, meaning we're trying to bring diagnostic into an even earlier stage of preventive healthcare. And by doing so, our company collects 4 dimensions data of a person. So genotype, phenotype, environmental data, and also the behavior data that you guys mentioned about, like Fitbit or however you wanted to share it with me. So I have a question for Mr. Davis. You said we have too much information and it's too unstructured, right? And I highly agree with you, and this is exactly what we're doing. Our mother company is actually the biggest franchised physical examination company in China. It's a listed company. So we have a lot of doctors at the backstage. We're trying to collect all these dimensions of data of one person in order to make sense, connecting all these dots of data. So to what degree do you think, my data scientists should make sense of these data that provide meaningful insights to a person that will be helpful in a doctor and physician way, so that I can bring it to the physician office and say, this is what I got from JJK Health, and will that help you to make more sense of my health and help me to diagnose on myself?
I don't have any specific, ideas other than I do think we should understand. I think we're kind of in a cowboy stage, or it's a U.S. expression, an explosive stage in where we are right now. So we're in a, and it's fairly typical of industry models where all at once there's a new opportunity, there's lots of new players, and we will eventually, it will self-select, there will be market pressures, there'll be regulatory pressures, but also there'll be consumer behavior that really drives this. And so my thinking there would be that ultimately, there's a next generation of doctors that understand that it's going to be a different way that medicine is used. Consumers are going to demand it differently because, and that certainly, to be one of those early, the trick there from a company perspective is to be one of those early companies that actually is one of the early adopted, because there will be, this is a space where number 2 and number 3 and number 4 will not do as well. And so keeping ahead of the curve will be good.
An added point there really is that I think you are at the front edge, you are at the front end of technology. Steve mentioned, today we probably don't have adequate number of doctors, at least in India, and probably China may be similar, who don't actually understand how to interpret your DNA sequence. DNA sequencing companies themselves are saying that this entire science is in a stage of development. So what we know about the genome today, 5 years from now, it may be entirely different. So it's a constantly changing world. But from all the tests that you are actually collecting, I think you need to have a set of experts who should draw out some meaningful insights about health. either predictive or current, that is not available through the normal basic sciences. And I think if you can do that and have a panel of experts, people like him, et cetera, who understand this domain, you will begin to understand this better as also to deliver more value.
I think also there are two things that have just happened in Texas. One is there's a new medical school at the University of Texas in Austin, which had 6 medical schools, but none on the campus in Austin. And it's the Dell School of Medicine. And they've started their first class this fall, will be, I think, 50 students. Getting back to your point, Allison, about training people. And there will be a whole new curriculum where it will be training physicians in digital health and using digital health as a way to provide care to their patients. I think that you're going to see that change happen over time, but fairly quickly. The ideal world would be somewhere between someone who's a medical doctor, and again, just like with the general public physicians, you can't memorize everything, right? It's not so much what you know, it's where to get what you need to know at a certain time. So going through a medical training in that way, having someone who can speak both the computer science or the IT language and medicine is sort of the perfect bridge. The second thing that just happened was an announcement this week that Texas A&M, which is a large university in College Station, has combined with Methodist Hospital, which is one of our hospitals where Dr. DeBakey was, and it's a large system in Houston, to start a new class of physicians. And this is more on the computer science and bioengineering, mechanical engineering side, that it would be you had to have an engineering degree in order to get into this medical school. So they're going to do the experiment of putting MDs and engineers together and go forward and train them.
Sounds like a winning model.
That one thing that's come up in your comment that we haven't talked about, but it's probably one of the most transformational issues in healthcare, is the way health insurance is being transformed, and the payer models are changing around the world. And the biggest revolution over the next 15 years might be moving from, health being managed and priced by actuarial data, looking at population health, to predictive analytics around individual behaviors. And policies will be redesigned, pricing will be restructured. The whole industry will change. Now that gets into privacy and a bunch of other things, but that's actually one of these places where it'll take 20 years to figure that out, but it's gonna totally change the game.
We have a question back here. Please identify yourself.
Hi, my name is also Ihan, and I work for the journal Nature. And so this is going to be reflecting my bias as a journal that is deeply involved in the natural sciences. And so I want to get back to Steve's point that he made right at the beginning, which is, in all this excitement about digital, I mean, we're talking about biology here at the end of the day, okay? So I live in Silicon Valley too, and the thought there is that hackathons and machine learning, they're gonna cure everything. But what we're talking about is this excitement to collect genomes and connect that to really complicated phenotypes. This is not, trivial science here. And the state of what we know now and the kinds of relationships we know are really, really far off, from making, to me, scientific sense of, the connection between a person's behavior and genetics to, their outcomes. And so to me, I see this enormous challenge even in making some scientific conclusions and then making the next step to something that's going to, alter a physician's decision. I see there's a really, a large number of bridges that still have to go. So this kind of concerns me, actually, sort of in this big question.
Touches on what you said already, that this enthusiasm for technology is sort of ahead of the science and the evidence base.
And so, I don't know exactly where you live, but Vinod Khosla, you'll know who he is. He made this statement a few years back, maybe as far as 5 years back. We don't need more physicians, we need better artificial intelligence and machine learning. I think that, again, on this stage yesterday, there was a discussion. That's a great tool, but no matter how good the computers are, you're never going to replace human beings. The computers will only do what they're programmed and told to do. You still need that, that ability to be able to understand the biology and make that relevant to the person. So I think you're right in terms of this is very, very complicated. The whole 3D printing thing was talked about. Well, can we print devices? Can we just make our own devices at home too? I think it's pretty absurd that that's actually going to happen. But the fact that we're discussing it brings into the into the realm of possibility the things you're talking about, that we're moving too far away, which is what Steve led with, and not fundamentally focusing on biology and science.
And a question over here, and then Daljit, you weigh in.
Yeah, that's right.
Do you want to go first?
Yeah.
No, I just wanted to add on. I don't think it's a question of either or. I think there's a new science that's developing today, which is digital, and they are unfettered in their thinking. They're looking at newer possibilities. It's not about saying that we won't do biology or chemistry. I think those scientific discoveries or experimentation, that's happening. And I think in some ways technology is enabling many of those discoveries to scale up at a faster pace, do it more accurately. So I don't think that they're in any way impacting each other in an adverse manner.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I mean, you just go back and look at the Herzenbergs at Stanford and cell sorting and how that transformed biology and how the breaking of Moore's law with genomic sequencing. So I think these are all tools that we're sort of drifting away from our original debate. This has been a good discussion, but I think that more information is good, but it's only information that people who have knowledge to use that information to guide the care of patients is the important thing.
And a question over here.
Yeah, my name is Bo Sile. I run an impact investing venture fund, and we focus on emerging markets. Invested into a company in India called Janicare, which is doing low-cost diabetes diagnostics and behavioral modification and coaching. Here you have a company that's doing hardware, software, integrating with doctors, integrating kind of with patients as well to really deliver a whole bunch of things. But as we talked about behavioral modification, that's something that, like you said, we don't know exactly what the compliance gene is. As you look through your organizations or governments or all the different actors within the health ecosystem, who are you seeing, or who are your organizations leveraging upon or relying upon, or are you doing it yourself, around behavioral modification? Or are we relying upon entrepreneurs to really start working on these problems? Because, who owns, I guess you could say, the results of these things at the end of the day, if it's insurance companies are only working with a family for 7 to 10 years, or governments aren't single-payer systems, or
You're looking for the evidence base around behavioral modification.
Yeah, or just tools, because medical folks we haven't figured that part out.
Sure.
Right?
So there's lots of published studies on behavioral nudges that are academics publishing studies on this. What do you think the answer to this is?
Well, you touch on something that will take us into the next hour of discussion if we had enough, is who owns the data? And there's a big movement around, well, it's my data, I own it. Well, the insurance companies say they own it, and the hospitals say they own it, and all this stuff. But I think that it's a combination. But it gets back to what Daljit said, that the individual patient has to be responsible for their own health. And they have to be able to use this data and use all the tools that are available to them, whether it be data from the internet, but again, I'm coming back to someone to guide you and help you through, a personal trainer, if you will, for health. So I think that, that what we're doing is we're trying to, in this Apple project that Bill McKeon, who I think is behind me here, is leading at Texas Medical Center, is to use Apple on the consumer side, but then to put all these platforms in place to get the data into the medical record, so that then all of that data can be used to interface with the patient more directly and more frequently. And I think that, behavioral psychologists, but even good nurse practitioners who understand how to communicate with people are an incredible part of the team. And oftentimes they develop, whether it's the avatar or the real person, develop a closer relationship with the patients than even the doctors do, because they have more time and they understand how to speak to the patients.
We have time for one more question.
Yeah, my name is Chandrasekhar. I'm from England. My friend talked about IT companies diagnosing, right? I have an 18-year-old daughter who one day morning woke up and said she needs to do an endoscopy because she's got the symptoms for an ulcer and she needs 300 mg of ranitidine. So that scares me, right? Basically, because the more data is also creating self-harm, and if you don't control it. So how do you regulate the data that is available? Maybe cigarette smoking is injurious to health, so don't diagnose yourself. Some regulation we need to bring in, right? Because if...
It might be impossible to regulate the amount. Is that impossible?
Well, I personally feel that going forward, there will be a mechanism of accreditation, of credentialing, but the choice will probably still remain with the individual that do you actually want to go to a reputable site or do you want to go to any site, that's available on the net. I was sharing with her yesterday. We had a patient from Kenya who actually came in. I got a call one day, somebody from McKinsey, and he said, I've got a partner or a sister who's had 2 kidney transplants from a doctor in India, and both the transplants have failed. And can you check out and let me know? Because I've been, some common friend had put us in touch. I found out about this doctor, and my nephrologist said, the most dubious doctor in India, don't ever touch him, now this information is not available. Now you go to the net, you don't know whether Dr. XYZ, who's saying that he's a good doctor, which expert has actually guided. That this lady had to have a 3rd transplant which happened in a hospital and, thankfully everything went well. But this is the problem that we face. And you were talking about stem cells. You go on the net, there are people claiming every cure on stem cell therapy without having done any trials, places in the CIS countries, all over the place. And millions of dollars are actually being spent. So the point is that as this information becomes more organized, as it is in the other industrial verticals, I think healthcare is also going to happen over a period of time. Like you said, it's early days. A lot of data has suddenly come in. I think we are all beginning to see the positives and the negatives, and I think some sense will prevail, and good people will come up to put up credible sites, credentialing, so that people can be guided to the right places for the right information.
So lots of opportunities here, but also lots of pitfalls. So quick show of hands. We've asked this question, will greater access to healthcare information make us healthier? Who says yes at the end of the discussion here? All right. Even given all the potential pitfalls, we have a lot of people weighing in yes. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
It's been a great panel. Thanks for joining us.